In this movie, we'll look at how you show who or what is responsible for an activity or action by using partitions or swim lanes. We'll see how you can partition an activity and how you can use freestanding swim lanes in an activity diagram. In business processes, it's often important to know what person or role or organizational unit of some sort is responsible for a particular activity in a workflow. Similarly, within the boundary of a computerized system, it may be important to know which class, component, or subsystem is responsible for an action or activity. Swim lanes or partitions allow us to show these responsibilities in activity diagrams by separating the activities into different rows or columns, depending on who or what is responsible for them. In the style of activity diagram that we've been using so far, it's possible to partition the containing activity to show responsibilities. So here, there's one partition for the user, which contains the activities that the user is responsible for. The other partition shows the activities that the system is responsible for. This is a common way of specifying use cases, separating out what the actor does from what the system does in response. Rather than showing partitions within an activity, it's common to show a diagram that has just swim lanes or partitions in it, and to place the nodes of the diagram, activities, actions, decisions, and so on, in the swim lanes. We show the name of the swim lane at the top if it's a vertical swim lane, or at the left if it's a horizontal swim lane. Let's see how we can apply this in Enterprise Architect. So we'll start by adding partitions to our existing diagram for Add a Device. Here's the Add a Device activity, and I'm going to make it a bit larger. I'm now going to right-click and select Advanced and Partition Activity. It displays this dialog box, and I'm going to add two partitions, one called User and one called System. I don't want one called Anonymous, so I'll just delete that. When I leave the dialog box, you can see the two partitions are visible in the activity. I'll reposition the dividing line for the partitions in the middle. Now I can move the activities in the diagram around so that they are shown in the appropriate partition. The initial node and display device entry screen belong to the system. I can select multiple items in Enterprise Architect by using the Control key when I click on things. Enter device details and submit belongs to the user, so I leave that in the user partition. These other activities belong to the system, so I'll move them down. And the final node belongs with the system. There we are. It's not a complex diagram, but we're showing which activities are the responsibility of the user and which of the system. Let's create a new activity diagram now with swim lanes. I'll create an activity diagram for Add a Device and call it Add a Device open bracket swim lanes close brackets. I right-click on Add a Device in the use case diagram, select New Child Diagram, Activity with Activity Diagram. Okay, so here's my new diagram. First thing I'm going to do is add some partitions or swim lanes into the diagram. They're shown in the toolbox with the name partition, and I click there and then click on the diagram. It prompts me for a name, and I'll call the first one user. Now by default, it's created this partition or swim lane going across the diagram, and I want it to go down the diagram. This little icon here that shows when the swim lane is selected allows me to toggle between the two orientations. So I'll create user, and then I want another partition, the system. Change its orientation to. When I move them up to one another, Enterprise Architect aligns them for me. Now I'll add an initial node, which needs to be in the system swim lane. It doesn't need a name. Now I want to add the first three activities. I could drag the existing activities from the project browser, but they can only belong to one enclosing activity at a time. So if I move them into this diagram, they'll move in the project browser. This is the kind of thing that may depend on the modeling tool that you're using. In order to keep it simple, I'm going to create new activities in this diagram. So the first one is display device entry screen. Second one appears in the user swim lane and is enter device details and submit. And the third one is back in the system swim lane and is called create new device. So I'll join the initial node, the first activity, with a control flow, and then join up the activities with control flows. Now I want to add a fork node. I select it from the toolbox and click on the diagram. It doesn't need a name. There are two versions in the toolbox, a horizontal one if the activity diagram flows down the page, and a vertical one if the activity diagram flows across the page. This time I'm using the one for diagrams that flow down the page. I'll add a join node as well, and then I'll add the two activities between them. Redisplay device details and test physical device. And now I connect them up using control flows. Control flow to the fork node, and then control flows from the fork node to the two parallel nodes, those two activities. Control flows from the activities to the join node. And then I want to add one more activity. This activity is called display test result, and an activity final node. And I connect those up using control flows. So in this movie, we've added partitions to an activity and we've added swim lanes to a diagram, both of which enable us to show the responsibilities for the activities or actions that make up the activity diagram.